Hello, everyone. This is Israeli-Palestinian Confederation Zoom simulation. Today's date is May 14, 2023. And we are hoping that Mr. Bennet Ramberg will join us. I know we're having a problem. He's having problem with the sound.
Joe, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah, I'm calling you by phone because for whatever reason the Zoom element is not working here. So we can continue to try, or
Okay.
I can do this by telephone.
Let's do it by phone.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
So today's date is May 14, 2023. We are supporting the creation of a common government for the people of Israel and Palestine to make peace. This will be a legitimate government for the whole area of Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. The Israeli government and the Palestinian governments are not elected by the people of Israel and Palestine. We are proposing the creation of a common government based on democratic principles, based on separation between the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch, with 300 parliament members in Israel, Palestine. My name is Joseph Avasar. My email is josephavasar@gmail.com. We have a website. It's at ipconfederation.org, which is in 3 languages. And once you go to IP Confederation, you can read the Constitution and the frequently asked questions. The Constitution is the full Constitution with the preamble, and it states exactly what will be the functions of each branch of government, the parliament with 300 parliament, executive with president and vice president, 1 Palestinian, 1 Israeli, and with a judicial branch, judge of Israelis and Palestinians together based on equality. We are not proposing the dismantling of the Palestinians or the Israeli government. We are proposing creating a common government independent of the Israeli and the Palestinian governments to make peace. Today we have our guest speaker. He will be on the phone, Bennet Ramberg. Dr. Ramberg is a nationally recognized expert on nuclear weapons, proliferation, terrorism, and international politics. He acted as a foreign policy analyst and consultant to the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Senate. He taught at Princeton, Stanford, and UCLA. Dr. Bennet published 6 books on international security issues and authored over 100 op-eds for the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, and the Wall Street Journal on subjects ranging from Israel-Palestine to other international conflicts. He received his PhD in international relations from Johns Hopkins and his Juris Doctor from UCLA. We are having other simulations and future simulations. I want to tell you about them as well. Our next simulation is Shlomo Zand, Professor Shlomo Zand from the Hebrew University, from the Tel Aviv University. That will be on May 28th. On June 11, I will be on vacation, so we will not have a simulation. On June 25th, we will have Yoram Perry, who is the former the late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and former editor-chief of the Israeli Daily Davar, which was an extremely important paper similar to Haaretz. Now, on July 9, I will have a debate about Zionism. Is Zionism good for Israel? With Yoram Sheftel. Yoram Sheftel is a lawyer in Israel. He's very well known. He has a lot of media in Israel, and he believes that Zionism is good for Israel. I believe that it is not, and we will be debating that on July 9 this year. We had many participants in the simulations, and you can see all their names. Noam Chomsky appeared twice in our simulations, and he recorded a video endorsing the a common government as we are proposing. There are people that we have invited many times, and unfortunately, they did not accept our invitations to speak at the simulations. We hope that they will accept our invitations. It is really interesting to know why they are not accepting the invitation. I think that a lot of them are on the fence and are not sure how to respond to what we are proposing as a common government for Israel and Palestine. The simulation today will take 120 minutes. We will have several segments. And after each segment, we will have Dr. Bennet Ramberg respond, and then we'll have a Q&A and closing remarks. We have a video that explains what our vision is. I'd like to play it.
The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has endured for generations. And instead of time healing the wounds, it's only caused the anger to fester and the violence to grow. But what if there was a way to alleviate the tension? Something that may not outright solve every problem, but at least create a forum that encourages a peaceful compromise. Welcome to the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, a common third government between the Israeli and Palestinian citizens, specifically designed to foster peace, tolerance, and economic prosperity between the two nations. Here's how it works. First off, both Israel and Palestine will keep their respective governments. Israel's Knesset and the Palestinian National Authority will remain unchanged. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, IPC, will be a third entity acting as a unifying agent between the two. The IPC will comprise 300 parliament members elected from 300 districts in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. Above them will preside a president and vice president, one Israeli and one Palestinian. In order for the IPC to pass a law, it will require a 55% majority from its Israeli representatives, as well as a 55% majority from its Palestinian representatives, thereby preventing either side from monopolizing the legislature. Of course, the IPC won't undermine the political power of either the Israeli or the Palestinian government. At any time, Israel or Palestine may veto a law passed by the IPC. If neither side vetoes, the law is passed. And the two nations are another step closer to resolution. Please help us make this a reality. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. We might speak different languages, but we all mean the same thing.
So we will be simulating what you've seen on the video. And before we start with the simulation, we'd like to take a pre-simulation survey, which we will compare to a post-simulation survey. So we'll have this survey done twice. So at this time, I'll ask all of you to vote. Do you support a common government for Israel and Palestine? Please vote at this time. Okay, I'll allow a little bit more time. Could you, Dan, can you publish the vote? 11 out of 14 voted yes, which is 79%. And 3 out of 14 voted no, which is 21%. Okay, we will stop sharing and we will conduct the same survey at the end of the simulation today. The purpose of the simulation is to demonstrate how a common government for Israel and Palestine could make peace. We are not anti-Israeli or anti-Palestinians. We are in favor of peace. Dr. Ramberg is not a representative of the IPC. He was invited to stress test the IPC and to give his opinion. we believe that a common government will have its own narrative. And we have narrative. In other words, we do not follow the Israeli narrative or the Palestinian narrative. We believe that if you picture as a whole, then you will have a different narrative. And that's what we have. We have a different narrative because we look at the picture as a whole. We expect to have a rigorous, respectable discussion with Dr. Ramberg. And it should be noted, we are not claiming exclusivity. We welcome other formulas for peace. We will ask you and Dr. Ramberg to judge our plan based on, is the IPC formula, could it attain peace? Is it implementable? Is there a downside to either the Israeli or the Palestinian side? However, we ask Dr. Ramberg and all of you to be fair, not to judge us based on perfection. Perfection is the enemy of good. Perfection is an impossibility. You can always find something wrong with legislation we pass or with the system we provide. But we ask you to judge it based on the alternative, not based on perfection. And I noticed that this issue of perfection versus alternative always comes up because when people object, they say, well, you could have done this, you could have done that. Yes, we could have done this and could have done that. We could have proposed this and that legislation. But we are not claiming to be perfect. We are asking you to judge us based on the alternative. We will show some legislation, not every legislation that a common government would pass. Basically, the reason we are showing legislation is because we want to demonstrate how legislation could pass the common government that neither the Israeli nor the Palestinian could veto, because they would lose legitimacy if they veto. We are not showing you every legislation because we are limited by time. We ask you to look at the big picture and avoid technical arguments. And we also ask that you refrain from comments during the simulation. This is simulations, but questions are fine. We are encouraging you to ask questions. This is not a lecture. This is a simulation. A simulation is a model that mimics the operation of an existing or proposed system. We are mimicking the operation of a proposed system. This is not a lecture. Therefore, please refrain from commenting, but ask questions. So if I show you a picture of an airplane and you say airplane caused pollution, that's a comment. Keep that to the end of the simulation or put it in the chat. But if you say, well, Joseph, how does this thing fly? That's a question. We're encouraging questions. We have to have certain assumptions. The whole simulation is based on assumptions that we are making in demonstrating how a common government will work. Once you accept the assumptions, then we will continue the simulation as if the assumptions are real, as if we achieve the assumptions. So these are the assumptions: that we conducted online elections and the election lasted 3 months, that we gave an option to 14 million people. That means in Israel, Palestine. That means in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza, and Jerusalem to vote. 14 million people. That's the total population. Of course, excluding minors. We will also ask you to assume that 5 million people voted, that 3 million Palestinian voted, and 2 million Israeli voted. That we will also ask you to assume that the president received 1.5 million votes. You will be asked to assume that me, Joseph, was elected as president, so that you know I never intend to be president. I'm not even qualified based on the Constitution. And a Palestinian lady was elected as by 1.3 million votes. We will rotate in 2 years. But for the purpose of the simulation, it makes it easier for me to demonstrate how the common government will work if we assume that I was elected president. I also want you to assume that 300 parliament members were elected. And I will ask most of you to act as parliament members. And when you are acting as parliament member, you should be assuming that you're representing 47,000 people. You're not representing all of the Palestinian people or all the Israeli people. You are representing 47,000 people in your districts. These are the assumptions that we ask you to assume. So let me first ask Dr. Bennet Ramberg. Dr. Ramberg, do you have difficulty assuming that these assumptions could become a reality?
Well, I think it would take an assessment, a review of a polling, frankly, of Israeli and Palestinians to make the judgment. I can't make a judgment here living in the United States whether the assumptions that you're putting forward are realistic. So I honestly, it would be improper for me to make that judgment.
Well, but whenever a government was first elected in any democracy, it never conducted a polling. It was always under the assumption that people will vote. So why are you saying that we need to have a polling when no government in the history of the world ever required polling before election?
Because I'd like this to work, and the best assessment to whether it'll work or not, I would suggest, would be a polling of the population. Now, in point of fact, we do have a poll. The RAND Corporation conducted a very interesting study, and I would urge people to look at it.
I'm sorry, the RAND Corporation did not run a poll before the first election of the United States.
Well, Joe, please, if you like, I can comment on what you're suggesting, but I'm suggesting there has been a polling already done by the RAND Corporation assessing various options, including Confederation, by the way. And
the RAND Corporation conducted a poll regarding elections in Israel-Palestine for common government?
Yes. The RAND Corporation has conducted a study that examined the following issues: the status quo, two-state solution, Confederation, and let me see what other elements here, and 2 or 3 other elements.
Wait. But they did not conduct a poll regarding an election for common government.
They did not conduct what you're putting forward. That's correct.
Okay. So
they did conduct a poll. However, they did conduct. Joe, let me speak. They did conduct an assessment whether the Confederation or a one-state solution would work. I mean, this was a focused group set of studies that they did 2 years ago. It's a published study that was published in 2021.
Dr. Ramberg, we are proposing 300 parliament members with a president and vice president. And I don't think that it is fair to ask us to conduct polling when no government in the world ever conducted polling before election, including.
Well, Joe, this is your perspective, and I'm suggesting, Joe, please, if I may, I am suggesting what I feel, and I understand you have a different perspective, and I respect that.
But that's not my question. My question to you is, do you have difficulty assuming what's in these assumptions, which are that what is the difficulty here? That we conducted online election for
the difficulty is based on the study.
Wait, that's a technical issue. That's a technical issue. It's not.
No, I think it's a fundamental issue. It's not technical.
Why is it fundamental?
Because you want to make progress and you want to use the best alternative possible to achieve what
I don't think you're responding
which is some sort of peace understanding between the population.
No. You're generalizing the issue.
Well, this is my perspective.
Let me just, 3 months election is a technical issue. Allowing 14 million people is a technical issue. Now, whether 5 million people would vote, that's not a technical issue. That's a question of whether you accept it.
Well, Joe, unless you invest the population in doing what you're suggesting, then it's going to be a challenge. And the question is how do you invest the population in the idea you're putting forward? It's quite easy to be an academic, as I have been for years, versus being in the field, as I've been as well, implementing things versus talking about them. And this is
Okay.
my suggestion.
Does anyone have any questions regarding these assumptions?
Yeah, I would like to hear much more about this Rand Corporation study from Dr. Ramberg. I think it's important for us to know what, you know,
They did not. This takes we have certain issues we have to go through. This is a completely different issue, and I am not going to get into that. The question do you have difficulty accepting those assumptions? That's the question.
Well, my difficulty pertains to implementation. And how do you implement something like this?
That's a technical issue. That's a technical issue.
No, technical issues become policy issues because you're talking about something that's novel, that's new. And so you have to invest, just conducting elections, for example, in this country is difficult enough. In the United States, which has conducted countless elections that we've seen in the last election.
We have 330 million people. Here is 14 million. All right, I'm not going to, I believe that these assumptions are achievable with a relatively small financial commitment. The war, 1 day of war between Israel and Gaza cost over $100 million. These elections are possible. They are, if we invest $100 million, it's a technical issue. It's a technical issue to make the people of Israel.
Why don't you conduct a survey to among the populations or focus groups to ascertain the attraction of the idea you're putting forward?
Well, we are. This is what we do right now.
No. You have a limited group. You've told me you've had about, typically on a telephone call, up to 120 or so.
Show me one government in the history of humanity that had focus group before it had the election.
Well, Joe, this is my perception. I don't find it convincing because of the difficulties and divisions within the populations we're talking about.
Are you saying that Israelis and Palestinians would not vote? Is that what you're saying?
I think it's plausible if they don't feel they're invested in this and that this is an idea that they can invest themselves in.
Well, if they have a person that they like running in their district, and if they have a person they like running for president, I believe that these assumptions are realistic, but I'm not going to argue.
Well, let me ask you a question. May I ask this with regard to a person running in the district? How are you going to define who that person is? And here in the United States,
we're not going to define. This is a democracy. The people in that will elect that person. It's not.
No, but first of all, there has to be parameters. How do you elect a person? Here in the United States, of course, we go through a process where we have various polling areas where people go to and they submit their ballots and so on. It's a complicated process. It is in other countries around the world.
It's a very simple process. Every will be 47,000 people, and people will run in that district to make themselves available to run and
how do they compete as to who's running against whom? How do they define who's the ultimate person running for the position?
They just put their names and the public vote for them. Why?
Oh, I see.
It's an online election. It's an online election.
I get you. Thanks for the clarification.
Dr. Ramberg, if I could just, characterize this in a slightly different way that might make it easier for us to proceed.
Thanks very much.
It's the purpose of the assumptions is to create a starting point. Now, this is very hypothetical. We perfectly acknowledge that. But the point is that at that starting point, it allows us to proceed with a simulation by which you can experience by, it's like a model UN or whatever. You experience what it's like, how that government would actually operate. And so then you can see it becomes less of a theoretical thing and more of a practical thing. We can actually see how things could be passed that would be difficult to attain otherwise in the current situation.
Right.
I have no, I've told Joe.
Dr. Ramberg, the idea is that this simulation is going to be based on the assumption that the election has been taking place and those results have been achieved. Mainly that 14 million people were allowed to vote, 5 million people voted, and 300 parliament members were elected. This is the
Okay, well, if you take the assumption as the fact, then we can proceed from the assumption, of course.
okay. All right. So now we need volunteers. We're going to be asking the audience to act as volunteers. We're going to ask people to act as Prime Minister of Israel, Palestinian Authority, and Hamas leader. Do I have a volunteer for a Prime Minister of Israel?
I volunteer.
Shlomo, okay. And do I have a Palestinian Authority? A volunteer for Palestinian Authority? Do I have a volunteer?
If nobody else wants it, I'll take PA.
Okay. Do I have a volunteer for Hamas? A Hamas leader?
If nobody wants it, I can do it.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. All right. So the rest of you, I will ask you to be either Palestinian or Israeli parliament members. You will have to be intellectually honest, and you will have to decide what area you are representing, whether you are a Palestinian or Israeli member. Remember, some of the district may be mixed districts. In other words, if you are from a exclusively Palestinian area, you will maybe representing Palestinian only. And I may ask you, what is your area? If you're Israeli from exclusively Israeli area, you may be representing Israelis only, but there may be a mixed district. So I'm going to be asking you at this time to decide, and I'll have the Palestinian parliament members vote first, say yes, so we know how many Palestinian parliament members we have. Palestinian only, please vote yes, so we know how many.
Joseph, do you have a clip-on mic? Because your voice is cutting in and out.
Oh, you know what? Let me bring my mic. I forgot to bring it. Hold on.
I'm very curious about the RAND Institute, what they concluded. They, of course, are being funded by we know whom, but still.
Okay, I'm back. I brought my mic. I forgot. Hook it up. Better? All right. So we have 5 Palestinian parliament members. Let's have the Israeli parliament members vote. Say yes. Five. And we have, in the polling, we have 8 Israelis. This is the first time we have more Israelis than Palestinians. Here are the results. And we have 8 Israelis, 5 Palestinians, and you will be representing your districts. And I may ask you, what is the district you represent? First issue we have to go through is a constitution. Libby, would you be so kind as to read out the constitution?
We believe that Palestinians and Israelis are entitled to equal rights under the law and guaranteed human rights and freedom. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation does not intend to supersede or supplant the Palestinian or Israeli governments, nor to abrogate or undermine any agreements between those governments. We recognize the need to work with the Israeli and Palestinian governments. Our purpose is to resolve conflicts and to expand the relationship between Palestinians and Israelis in a fair and equitable manner. We believe in equal rights under the law, guaranteed human rights, and freedom for all. We voluntarily give the legislatures and the governments of Israel and Palestine veto power over legislation we pass relating to the domain of control of those governments. We believe in the separation of power between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. We believe in the creation of a permanent secular government for all the people residing in Israel and Palestine. We believe in having a separate judicial branch relating to IPC legislation with Israeli and Palestinian judges, with a system to avoid biased decisions based on nationality.
Okay, so basically the Constitution says that we respect the Israeli and the Palestinian governments. Whatever they agree between themselves is fine with us. We are not going to undermine any agreements between them. And we give them, if we pass legislation that affects their sovereignty, we give them a veto power over our legislation. Does anyone have any questions regarding this legislation, this Constitution? Including Professor Ramberg.
No, I don't have any qualms.
I'm sorry, Dr. Ramberg.
Yeah, I don't have any objections.
Okay, do you have questions?
No. As all constitutions, they're admirable in their ambition, and
Okay.
This would be certainly in that vein.
Okay, so hearing no questions, let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote on the Constitution. To ratify the Constitution, do you ratify? Now, if you do not ratify the Constitution, you cannot be a parliament member, because in order to be a parliament member, you need to accept the Constitution. So 6 out of 6 Palestinian parliament members voted. Share the results. 6 out of 6, 100% of the Palestinian parliament members accepted the Constitution. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members, please vote. Israelis, we have at least 8. Okay, we're not going to wait for the rest of them. 6 out of 6 voted yes. 2 did not vote. I don't know why, but they did not vote no. So I'm assuming maybe they left or whatever. I just wanted to let you know that now that you accepted the Constitution, you basically accepted an imperfect system, because you agree to give the Israeli and the Palestinian governments a veto power. So by definition, the Constitution states that it is an imperfect system because we give a veto power to the Israeli and the Palestinian governments. Okay, let's go to the first. Let me go to some of the objections that could come, is that about Israel or the Palestinian objecting to this common government. They don't really have a reason to object. And we will, I believe that we will have sufficient number of Israelis and Palestinians voting, because they are not a monolithic society. The Israeli and the Palestinian governments do not have the legal authority or the moral authority to object, and they may lose legitimacy if they object to the common government, and they never attempted to disrupt the common government. In fact, we did have an election. We did create 300 districts. We announced it with a full page ad in the New York Times, and there was no interference by the Israeli and the Palestinian governments. And in fact, we did have the election, but they were not successful election because there was no awareness of this election. But all of the things that I presented in the assumptions, including the elections themselves, has been created in real life. Let's go to the first order of business for the Parliament, and that's granting a veto power. Libby, could you please read out, and notice there are some changes from the last time you read it.
The Confederation is the government of the entire population of Israel and Palestine from the river to the sea. We recognize the Palestinian and Israeli governments and are seeking their cooperation to implement our vision for peace by giving them a veto. We will do our utmost to satisfy the essential needs of each government. We are pleading with the Palestinian and Israeli public to understand that while we would like to pass the best legislation possible to improve their lives, under these constraints, a perfect legislation is not possible. We hereby bestow a veto power relating to legislation affecting sovereignty to the following: the government of Israel on issues in which it is indispensable, the Palestinian Authority on issues in which it is indispensable, Hamas on issues in which it is indispensable. In the event of changes in governments, this legislation may be amended or repealed. The Parliament will decide on indispensability. Vetoes may be bestowed individually or collectively.
Does anyone have any questions regarding what we are about to pass, which is granting a veto power to these governments? Dr. Ramberg, do you have any questions?
No, I think it's realistic.
Okay. Hearing no questions, let's have a vote. Palestinian Parliament members, please vote on this question of granting a veto power. Okay, publish the votes. 100% of the Palestinian Parliament members, 6 out of 6 voted yes. Let's have the Israeli Parliament members please vote. Okay. 9 out of 9 Israeli Parliament members voted in favor of this legislation unanimously. And stop sharing the results. And let's go to the first order of business, which is, these are the legislations that we will be deciding. The first one is, should Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant be referred to the ICC? And then hopefully we'll be able to deal with all these issues. Declaration of peace, improve relations with Iran, Hezbollah, and other neighboring countries, and removal of the walls between Israel and Palestine. Hopefully we will be able to deal with all these issues. It's a lot of business to do in short time, but we'll try to do it. The first legislation, Libby, could you please read it?
So this is about referral of Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant to the International Court of Justice. In the background, on May 9, 2023, an Israeli overnight air attack targeting Palestinian residential homes in the Gaza Strip resulted in the deaths of 13 Palestinians, including 4 children and 4 women, and the injury of approximately 20 more, 3 of whom were children and 7 of whom were women. The targets of the attack were 3 Palestinian military commanders with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad movement, Tariq al-Din, Khalil al-Bahantini, and Jihad al-Ghanem. The attack was approved by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and the legislation. It is inconceivable that Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant were unaware of the significant presence of innocent civilians. The ordered attack was disproportionate and unjustified given the level of certainty that many civilians would lose their lives. The attack was done with reckless disregard for human life. Therefore, we recommend the referral of this matter to the International Court of Justice as a crime against humanity. Do you support the referral of this matter to the International Court of Justice?
Does anyone have any questions regarding this legislation?
Other than the fact it will obviously be vetoed.
Well, it's not subject to a veto.
No, I have a question. Why is Mahmoud Abbas and the leaders of Islamic Jihad not on that list as well?
This is a legislation regarding a specific act, which took
That's what I'm asking.
on May 9.
Yes, they fired thousands of rockets into Israel. Why are they not listed? Unless it's straight
Yes,
anti-Semitism.
because when you speak
I
about
got it.
a criminal act, you need to specify the date, time, and place, and the reason. Now, if you want to suggest legislation against Mahmoud Abbas or against any Islamic Jihad or against any Hamas member, send it to me and I'll present it next time. But this is not about comparing one over another. Jeff, do you have a question?
Yeah, why the International Court of Justice and not the ICC, the International Criminal Court?
We do not have at this time a criminal court, and our criminal courts are subject to a veto power by the Israel. If we create a criminal court, it will be subject to a veto power by the Israeli and the Palestinian governments.
And Joe, why is this not subject to a veto?
Because we can, regardless of whether the Israeli or the Palestinian government agree to it, we don't need we do not need their authority to. It does not violate their sovereignty. They cannot prevent us from doing it.
Let's just vote.
And in order, the International Court of Justice accepts referral from legitimate government. We are a legitimate government. We are elected by the people of Israel and Palestine. In fact, we are the only legitimate government in Israel, Palestine.
Because you represent both Israelis and Palestinians.
Correct, and we are elected by both Israelis and Palestinians.
Let's vote.
All right, let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote on this legislation. Oh, let's ask Dr. Ramberg. Dr. Ramberg, do you have any questions regarding this legislation?
None of the laws of war combatants are legitimate targets if they situate themselves in areas where they're civilians. It presents a problem for military action. It's typical that, unfortunately, very unfortunately, as the United States found in its various efforts to target combatants, trying to limit damage to those combatants, that others, regrettably, terribly so, are killed in the process. So
yeah,
just let me finish. If you assume the risk of placing yourself among civilians, there's a risk to yourself. The combatant, the other side makes a judgment whether that, on balance, whether it's appropriate to take up the combatant, and if the pluses and minuses merits the action. This is common in all wars, and we can parse the issue, but it's the reality of war.
Well, these people were sleeping.
I understand that, but if you have a combatant,
yeah. So the question is a legitimate question.
Mm-hmm.
Family members of leaders, legitimate targets.
No, the idea is to get the combatant under the laws of war. You try to do your best to go after a combatant. Again, if you surround yourself with family members and others, this presents a problem. If the combatant is a targeted combatant, legitimate combatant, then one is assuming the risk that is the combatant by surrounding himself with family members or others.
Okay, so let's say Benjamin Netanyahu, is he a legitimate target
He would be considered a combatant, yes, and yes, he would be as a leader
he would be,
of the country.
and his family would be, his children and his
No,
wife.
no, no. You're extending this. The combatant is the combatant. That is the fighter.
I know.
Fighter. If he surrounds
So-
himself, look, I'm, Joe, this is the way war is fought. The laws of war, the 1948 protocols of laws of war. It's very strict with regard to focusing on combatants only. And we try to parse this.
Okay, but if you are aware with certainty that you're going to be killing substantial number of innocent people while
Well,
you.
if the combatant is, let's take it to the most extreme case. If Adolf Hitler is with his Frau in the bunker, the Frau is not responsible for what is going on in the war. Should we nonetheless strike the bunker and kill the Frau?
Well, it's not a legitimate comparison.
Well,
No.
You're basically, look, we
Joseph,
have 3 combatants and over 30 people innocent.
I understand that, and the combatants effectively place themselves in jeopardy, and used as a shield the innocents around them.
Okay,
If the combatants were properly situated in their bunker, command center, and so on, then they certainly would be legitimate targets. You would agree with that?
Yeah, but that's
but they intentionally place themselves.
That was not a bunker. That was a residential home in which.
But that's where they place themselves.
Yeah, why not?
That's what happens in every war if you're trying to go after a combatant.
I think
Mm-hmm.
we're getting distracted by discussing the merits of this particular proposal. I mean, definitely it could be debated either way, but basically what we're trying to do here is to demonstrate how these types of issues could come up and then what would happen. So, maybe it would get through the IPC, maybe it wouldn't. Maybe that would cause some furor internationally, maybe it wouldn't. I mean, I know the United States took out the Iranian general because of the things that he did in Iraq and whatever. So,
well, let's assume, for example, Osama bin Laden. Others were killed in the raid on the compound. For example, the aim was to get only Osama bin Laden. Others were killed in the process to get to him. We knew that others were in that facility, that house at the time. A number of other people were killed in the raid.
They did not drop a bomb on the whole compound.
No, they killed a number of people in the process.
They killed a number of people while they were trying to
in the process.
Yes, but they.
Joe, I'm dealing with reality in terms of what we deal with when we deal with combatants who surround themselves as civilians.
Yeah,
this is the reality of war. I'm not dealing with a fictional situation.
So there was no ticking bomb here. There was nothing going. There were.
These are 3 jihadist leaders. This is the Israeli.
I know. So
you can parse this and say they were not legitimate targets.
So
you're basically
saying that everyone surrounding
No, if he assumes the risk, if the combatant assumes the risk of placing others to shield himself, this presents a problem. If he's a critical party.
No, the shielding themselves is when in an act of fighting. But this is in the
this is part of an act of fighting, since they were jihadists. They were combatants against the Israelis. I mean, I don't know the specifics who these individuals are, so I can't comment on that. Now, they may have been legitimate or illegitimate targets, but they were based on press reports combatants. Let's go on to another subject, though. I don't think this is worth. I mean, we think we have a disagreement here.
All right, let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Please vote. Palestinian Israeli parliament members. Publish the vote. 67% of the Israeli parliament members voted yes. So let's go to the next legislation. And that is declaration of peace. Libby, could you please read this legislation?
Our goal is to be a shining example for peace and tolerance. We believe in the respect for all people regardless of religion or gender. We are committed to protect all people of all religions and to value the sanctity of life. All people are equal. All religions are equal. The practice of religion is voluntary and shall not be imposed. The land belongs to no religion, and no war shall be imposed on the count of religion. We encourage all governments of the world to adopt this resolution. We hereby submit this declaration to the Israeli government, the Palestinian government, and Hamas, and ask that they will adopt the same.
Dr. Ramberg, do you have any comments regarding this declaration of peace?
No, it's admirable.
All right. Let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote on this declaration of peace. Palestinian only. Okay. In the polling, share the results. 100% of the Palestinian parliament members voted yes. Let's have the Israeli parliament members please vote. Okay, end the polling, share the results. 86% voted in favor of this declaration. I'm going to go to the next one because that one is important. Improve relations with Iran, Hezbollah, and other neighboring countries. Libby, could you please read this legislation?
Create delegations and travel abroad to negotiate a permanent and lasting peace with neighboring countries. Establish embassies to encourage peace and economic cooperation. Cooperate with the Palestinians and Israeli governments. And we hereby submit this legislation to the Israeli government, the Palestinian government, and Hamas, and we bestow upon them a veto power which may be exercised in the next 60 days.
So basically, because we are a common government, because we are Palestinians and Israelis together, and we want to make peace with all of these entities, we want to create a delegation to travel abroad and to negotiate peace. Dr. Ramberg, do you have any comments regarding this legislation?
No, it would be a good idea if it was achievable.
What do you mean if it's achievable? If the delegation...
But the presumption is that it is achievable, and assuming that presumption is correct, yes, I think it's a good idea.
Okay. This is specifically speaking about improve relations with Iran, and you are well aware that there is a dispute between Israel and Iran regarding nuclear weapons or nuclear proliferation. Do you think this could help that aspect?
You know, with regard to Iran's nuclear weapons program, the origins of if you look in the long history, the origins of the Iranian nuclear program actually began under the Shah. Efforts were attempted at during the Shah's administration to establish a nuclear weapons program. Now, the origins of the Iranian nuclear program, as we see under the revolutionary regime, frankly, it's an interesting question, which I had never thought about what prompted this. I know what prompts other countries to acquire nuclear weapons per se. Now, certain inertia has been acquired by that nuclear program to continue the program as is. Unfortunately, I was a supporter of the imperfect JCPOA. I thought, by and large, it was a good agreement. The problem with the agreement were the sunset clauses.
What is a JCPOA? What is that?
The current agreement, the agreement that the Obama administration had negotiated with the Iranian government, it had many positive elements, but the elements would sunset within a few years. By 2030 plus, the entire agreement would sunset, and the Iranian government would be subject to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which forbids a non-nuclear weapon state from acquiring nuclear weapons. But what we've seen as a result of the Trump administration vacating of the agreement is the Iranians have boosted the production of near weapons usable material. which presents a serious problem. Now, what you're suggesting, however, is interesting, that the Iranians claim that their effort is to destroy the Zionist regime. If the quote-unquote the Zionist regime under the Confederation no longer existed, the rug would be pulled under from the Iranian nuclear program and the antagonism Iran claims to have against the Israel-Palestine or the Confederation, as you put it forward. Related to this, if I may, is an interesting proposal that appeared in the current issue of the website of Foreign Affairs that raises an interesting proposition. Because of the Chinese intervention to reestablish relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia, is there some impulse now to try to attenuate the Iranian nuclear program because of the involvement, because of the recent relationship that has been established between Saudi Arabia and the Iranian government and also the Gulf states? It's a very interesting proposition. I'd urge people to look at the article that appears in the website of Foreign Affairs. So just going back to your point, however, were there an Israeli-Palestinian delegation that said, we have resolved our problems, the impetus for the Iranians to maintain forces in Syria that threaten the Israelis and so on, the underpinnings would be removed entirely. Now, the Iranians have used the Israelis as a whipping boy to heighten the revolutionary and nationalistic spirit in Iran. But with your proposal, Joe, this would undermine the principle. So it's an interesting proposition.
Would you recommend to either the Israeli or the Palestinian government to veto this legislation?
No.
Would you be in favor of advocating for this legislation?
Well, I think if you have the confederation that you're suggesting and the negotiating team that goes to Iran to establish normal relations between the new confederation and Iran, of course, this is to be something that should be promoted.
Okay, thanks. All right, so let's have does anyone have any comments regarding this legislation or questions, really, questions?
Hi, Joseph. I have a question as an Israeli parliament member.
Hi.
Hi. When you say create delegations to negotiate peace with neighboring countries, it seems a little vague. The title of the legislation is referring to Iran and Hezbollah, which is in Lebanon. Could you be more clear about that? And also the concept of establishing embassies seems very formal. Is that representing the Israeli, Hamas, and Palestinian governments as an embassy?
No. The neighboring countries are Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and possibly even Iraq. And the embassies would be specific for the common government, not Israeli, not Palestinian, but we are a separate government, so we will have our own embassies.
Okay, so it seems a little vague to me to have the legislation seems a little vague to me to be referring to 4 or 5 or 6 countries when the title of it is more pointed towards the Hezbollah and Iran. So it's confusing.
Well, okay.
That is a major foreign policy conflict at the present time of all the Middle Eastern countries, I would say.
And Hezbollah is not a country. I'm sorry.
Let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote on this legislation. Palestinian parliament members, please vote.
Dr. Ramberg, would you repeat the title of that Foreign Affairs article?
Okay, 5
I can give you the name of one of the authors. He's a Johns Hopkins professor, Vali Nasser, N-A-S-R. I don't know the title. It's on the Foreign Affairs web. Well, it may not be on the current Foreign Affairs website. Just type into Google, I would suggest, Vali Nasser, it's V-A-L-I-N-A-S-R, Nasser article about Iran nuclear program, something to that effect. It's a very, very interesting article.
Okay, let's have the Israeli parliament members please vote. Israelis. Okay, and the polling published the results. Okay, 100% of the Israeli parliament members. Let's go to Mr. Prime Minister of Israel. Are you going to veto this legislation?
No, of course not.
Okay. The PA, Mr. PA, are you going to veto this legislation?
No.
And Hamas leader, are you going to veto this legislation?
I am very skeptical about this legislation and reserve the right to veto after consulting with my colleagues, because I am very suspicious that this could be a plot to try to undermine our personal relations with revolutionary Muslim forces, and we therefore, I am very skeptical. I think I will veto it.
You will veto it?
Yes.
Okay.
Need more explanation.
The veto power is, you are not a, let's go back to the veto power that was given to you, is given to you if you are an indispensable, if it's indispensable, it's not you're not an indispensable party. Your veto is not indispensable. Therefore, we are going to go even if you veto it. Let's go to Professor Ramberg, Dr. Ramberg again. Do you expect that in reality, let's say we do have a common government, let's say we do have the parliament members voting for it, do you expect in reality that the Israeli and the Palestinian governments will react in the same way as they did today in not vetoing it, except Hamas?
Well, I would expect what you're suggesting, yes.
All right. Okay, go to I think the next one, which is removal of the wall and checkpoints between Palestine and Israel. Libby, could you please read this legislation?
Create delegations and travel abroad to negotiate a permanent and lasting peace with neighboring countries.
Wait, no. It says here you're sharing pause. So let me stop sharing and start sharing again.
I still have improved relations with Iran and Hezbollah.
Yeah. Okay, do you see removal of the wall?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Removal of the wall, barriers, and checkpoints between Palestine and Israel. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation is calling for the Israeli government to promptly remove the wall, fences, barriers, and all checkpoints scattered across the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. We hereby submit this legislation to the Israeli government and Palestinian government and Hamas, bestowing upon them a veto power which may be exercised in the next 60 days.
Dr. Ramberg, do you have any comments regarding this legislation?
Well, I mean, if you have the Confederation, as you've suggested, with the parameters you've put forward, then the wall would be removed. I have real doubts, however, this is a practical alternative for Israelis. Furthermore, with regard to this matter, you'll always have those who are objecting to this or that, let's say, neither community, frankly. And the Israelis would not allow the security of the what you'd call Israel today to be impinged upon by the inability to go into the West Bank and conduct military operations to secure the state. So I think the wall would remain for the immediate future until the Federation really gained the confidence of everyone and was demonstrated to be something that really was practical. I think it would an immediate removal of the wall, I think, would be implausible.
All right. Let's have a vote. Palestinian parliament members, please vote on this. Okay. End the polling. Share the results. Stop sharing. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Israeli parliament members, please vote. End the polling. Share the results. So 55% of the Israeli, 100% of the Palestinian, 57% of the Israelis voted in favor of this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli Prime Minister. Mr. Prime Minister, are you going to veto this legislation?
No. I
Well,
won't.
look, I'm delighted you're not going to veto it, but are you assuming the personality of Benjamin Netanyahu? Because that's what you have to do in this simulation.
Oh, he won't agree to anything.
You're not the prime minister as Shlomo. You are the prime minister as Netanyahu.
Well, Netanyahu would not agree to any of these, obviously. So I don't know what. So I just assume that I somehow represent the Israeli side.
You are Netanyahu. You are not Shlomo.
So yeah, what do you think? He would agree to all of that?
No, you seem to do it. Come on, Shlomo, you can do it.
I agree with Shlomo.
Be an actor.
Are you not able to assume the personality of Benjamin Netanyahu?
It is hard, actually, to tell you the truth. It's hard because he's real actor. I mean, he doesn't care for anything but himself. So if it serves him, in one way or another, who knows? But I'm assuming that to remain the prime minister in Israel today, which is a fascist, racist country, of course, you have to reject all of this.
All right. The PA, Charles, are you going to veto this?
No, obviously not.
And Hamas, are you going to veto this? Giacomo?
No,
Okay.
no veto.
All right. Good. Okay. So,
Oh, by the way, I put a link to the foreign affairs articles that Dr. Ramberg mentioned, and also to the RAND study.
Terrific.
Alternatives in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the chat.
All right. Let's do a post-simulation survey. After participating in the simulation, do you support a common government for the people of Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza that will coexist with the Israeli and the Palestinian government? Could you please vote? Do you support the common government? Now, that's everyone. Everyone, please vote, regardless of your, if you're Palestinian. Okay. Polling. There, the results. 93% versus 7%. So we started with 79% no, now we went up to 93%. We started with 73% yes, now we ended up with 93%. So I think that gives you some idea that people, when they understand what it is, they are supporting. I will, if you're, okay, let me stop sharing here. And I ask you, is anyone here willing to record a video supporting the concept of an IPC? I know that some of you have done it. Are there any new people that are willing to? And I will set up a private Zoom meeting with you to record that. But do I have people now that are expressing their willingness to support the IPC? Okay, let me go to share the screen again. I believe that a common democracy can bring peace, that online elections are feasible and can be held securely. Estonia holds 9.5 million people with 9.5 million, and they have online elections. And one day of war between Israel and Gaza could create a is the expenditure on is $100 million in Israel and Gaza. More than that, $100 million could make this thing a reality. So we are asking you to write to your whoever, your paper, your representative, to tell them about this idea. Let me just show you what we can do for what $100 million can do. It could buy a Van Gogh, it can buy an Airbus, and it could buy a mansion in Los Angeles, or it can make peace between Israel and Palestine. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and let's go to question and answer to ask Dr. Ramberg if you have any questions.
No, I don't.
No, if you have, if they have questions for you. Okay, Shlomo, you have a question?
I have several questions, but I'm trying to, okay, so first of all, as an expert on nuclear proliferation, non-proliferation, I wonder what you think about the situation, the volatile situation now with the United States against Russia and two nuclear powers, Russia and China. What do you think about the situation, and are they that crazy? I know it is not, doesn't sound related, but Israel is always in it in one way or another. And the other question I have, what kind of solution do you view or you viewed in the past for this so-called conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that
okay,
is different?
yeah, I'll try to answer both questions. You know, the threats that Putin has put forward with regard to the possible use of nuclear weapons is concerning. It's a situation we've not seen before. However, the threat of the use of nuclear weapons has existed in past crises. For example, during the Vietnam period, there was Nixon put forward what is called the madman theory, that he would use nuclear weapons against the North Vietnamese to try to curtail the Vietnam War. It was a threat, and the threat has appeared, at least impliedly, in various crises. For example, the Berlin crisis, certainly the Cuban Missile Crisis, and so on. So the presumption is threats remain threats. But with regard to the current Ukraine war, you know, we're in a situation that we've quite never seen before. The question remains whether these threats would let's say with regard to the use of tactical nuclear weapons would ever be implemented by the Russian government, the Putin government that saw itself losing the war, and this would be to stem the conflict by scaring everybody. And what the United States response was, the United States has told the Russian government there'll be very, very severe consequences where any nuclear weapon used. Now, mind you, so-called tactical nuclear weapons can be quite small, but nonetheless, they would scare the hell out of anybody and everybody, frankly. And we're frankly, in this regard, in uncharted territory. It's concerning. I mean, it is concerning, although there's precedence to threats by the United States, notably, and the Russians in the past to use nuclear weapons. With regard to the Chinese involvement, we've never had a situation where you have three major nuclear powers confronting each other, and this was attenuated during the Cold War because of the various arms control negotiations the United States and the Russians agreed to, which reduced actually the numbers of nuclear weapons substantially. The major treaty, the New START agreement, still is in effect, although implementation by the Russians has been impacted by the current conflict. But it has another year or two to run, and this limits the number of weapons, that is, strategic weapons, both countries have. With regard to my views of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I told Joe that this is not an area which I focused on, other than one article I wrote a number of years ago during the first Gaza war for the New York Times, and I asked myself this question: why does this conflict never end? And I made an assessment looking at the conflict through the lens of civil wars. That is, in my view, this conflict is a conflict over territory. Who's going to control the territory? And you have two contending parties that want to control the territory. When I wrote the article at the time of the first Gaza war, it was the time there was another civil war going on in Sri Lanka. Nobody paid attention to the Sri Lankan civil war, which had cost the lives of 70,000 people. And the Palestinian-Israeli conflict had lasted, of course, even more years than the Sri Lankan civil war. But that conflict, that is the Sri Lankan Civil War and most civil wars that end durably end when one side defeats the other. I'm not making a comment. This is not a moral judgment. The fact of the matter is, most civil wars, you take the American Civil War or other ethnic civil wars that have taken place across various areas, for example, Yugoslavia, Biafra, and so on and so forth, they end when one side definitively defeats the other. That's the most durable way to end the Civil War. Another way civil wars end is if you have what's called a mutually hurting stalemate. For example, in Northern Ireland, we had a civil war that lasted decades. You had a mutually hurting stalemate. This allowed a mediator, George Mitchell, to come in there. And we had an accommodation and agreement that's lasted now, I think now 25 years, just memorialized recently. But you don't have a mutually hurting stalemate between Israel and the Palestinians. The Israelis, by and large, are not hurting. The Palestinians in Gaza are sucking up the hurt, given the leadership they have there. And the West Bank is sucking it up to a degree. But there's not a mutually hurting stalemate, which is required for mediators to come in and for negotiations to succeed. So what we have is a status quo, which I think is going to be the status quo for the foreseeable future. I honor what Joe is attempting to achieve with regard to this, the idea of a confederation. But based on the history, as I reviewed it in the New York Times article, and if one wants to see it, it's entitled "A Fight to the End." It's a very, I think, very interesting article. Again, I wrote it over a decade ago, and it's worth looking at. So it's my perspective. This is my conclusion why this conflict never ends, through the lens of civil wars and the history and the academic literature.
All right, let's go to Charles. Charles, and then Janine. Charles, you have a question?
Yeah, like the example of the combatants in Gaza being cheek and jowl with civilians. Basically, if you look at nuclear weapons, it's kind of like whole nations are held hostage to the same principle, basically. And nuclear weapons are extremely cheap in terms of being able to balance against a formidable foe. So this is a situation that I don't see resolving itself unless and until, various nation states get to the point where they can recognize it's in their self-interest to start acting as the one entity that the globe is, rather than thinking there's going to be some kind of zero-sum game of one-off between them. And this is corresponding at the same time with climate change kind of putting an expiration date on any of our activities if we don't find the cooperation necessary to resolve it. And I just like to hear your thoughts about those two things coming together and the possibility, if you see any, of their resolution.
Well, I think I think they're distinct when you're talking about climate change and the nuclear issue. Look, we have 100 plus, I think, 180 plus countries that have signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. We have a set number of countries that are nuclear weapon states that are unlikely to give up their nuclear weapons. The one country we're trying to fend off at this point in time is North Korea. And our efforts in that regard to inhibit their nuclear program is not going to go anywhere. And so we have a limited number of countries, and the fight of using nuclear weapons has kept the nuclear peace. And when crises have occurred, fortunately, we've had, I'm just to wax a little here with regard to nuclear crises. We've had several nuclear crises. The Cuban Missile Crisis is the one best known. We had a crisis that few people know about between the Soviet Union and China in 1969, which was a war that took place, a border war that took place when nuclear weapons were threatened. We've had wars between India and Pakistan. And in all these cases, at the end of the day, the threat of the use of nuclear weapons frightened countries to death, but also very significant in ending these crises was the presence of, or the allowance for diplomacy to intervene. Robert Kennedy, for example, met with the Soviet ambassador. The fact that he had diplomatic relations with the Russians proved critical to ending the Cuban Missile Crisis. Likewise, in the Soviet-Chinese crisis of 1969. And Indo-Pakistani crises have been settled because we've had the intervention of the United States as intermediary. So fortunately, we've had these diplomatic links. In the Middle East, we have an aspiring nuclear weapons state in the case of Iran, and we have Israel, which has had nuclear weapons for many years, an undeclared nuclear weapons state. And it's always said it will not be the first country to introduce nuclear weapons in the Middle East. Well, the first country to have done so was the United States, which has nuclear weapons on some of its naval forces. So, in any case, the Israelis were forced by the United States not to acknowledge that they ever had or have nuclear weapons, although it's understood that they do. But they don't flout the nuclear weapons. The agreement reached between Golda Meir and Richard Nixon was, do not flout your nuclear weapons. The Israelis never talk about their nuclear weapons. They never do so. The government simply never talks about them. Were the Iranians to go and declare themselves as a nuclear weapons state, I wouldn't imagine that the Israelis would do the same.
Does Israel have I don't want to use the word legitimate, but does it have any scenario in which it could use its nuclear weapon?
Well, the purpose of these weapons, our weapons and others, it's to deter. That's the ultimate function. The question is, in time of crisis, it just reminds me, there was one case where the Israelis thought about using nuclear weapons, and this was in the 1973 war, when the country, when the risk of being overrun was significant with Syrian forces coming from the north. And there was a cabinet meeting that took place of Golda Meir and senior cabinet members, and Golda Meir was emphatic, we're not going to use nuclear weapons. And at least this is the reporting. The best book on this subject, Israel nuclear weapons, is, his name is Avner Cohen. It's a masterful book about the development of the Israeli nuclear weapons program. It's a page-turner. And I would urge those who are interested in the subject to take a look at the book. But it was the Syrian civil war. Some contemplation was thought during the 1967 war as well about detonating a nuclear weapon in the Sinai Desert as a warning to the Egyptians, but that never was fulfilled. The Israelis have been reluctant. We certainly will not talk about the program. The program continues. Materials generated. Our understanding of the program, at least based on public information, is very, very limited. I might mention one other element about the Israel nuclear issue, and there's one matter which receives little attention, which is in the event of war, the risk to Israel to its Dimona nuclear facility. That's a reactor. It's a weapons reactor situated in the Negev Desert. It's a relatively small reactor, but it's a dedicated reactor to produce nuclear material for the weapons program, and it remains a target. In fact, during it was I think the '91 Iraq War, the Persian Gulf War, the Iraqis launched rockets towards the Dimona reactor. Though none of the rockets got in the vicinity of the Dimona reactor. Where the reactor hit and the nuclear elements distributed, I did a study a few years ago for a magazine called Arms Control Today, which details the consequences. The consequences, depending on weather conditions, would spread to different parts of Israel and Palestine. That is the West Bank as well. It depends on the time of year. In the article I wrote details with maps and so on what would happen. The contamination, given the size of the reactor, which is relatively small, would be relatively light, but it would certainly create great fear and apprehension among the Israeli population and the Palestinian population, for that matter. The reactor has been threatened by the Syrian government at times. Hamas has threatened the reactor. The Iranian government has threatened the reactor, and the Palestinians, at times with the rocket launches, have launched rockets towards the reactor.
Well, let me ask you a theoretical question. What if we have a common government and they go to Iran and Iran says, well, yeah, we will be willing to forego our nuclear if Israel dismantle itself of its nuclear weapons. Do you think that Israel would?
I think the Israelis still would
realistic?
be. Yeah. I think until relations broadly within the region settle down, that the Israelis would be reluctant to eliminate the nuclear weapons program, because there have been others in the past, notably the Iraqis who attempted to acquire nuclear weapons, the Egyptians in the past. I mean, clearly, the landscape, the political landscape in the region is different than it was decades ago, but as the ultimate safeguard, I think the Israelis would be reluctant to give up their nuclear program. Nonetheless, it's something that would be worth exploring. Now, the motivation for the Iranians to keep the nuclear program may be multifold. It's not so much Israel as a deterrent against the United States, for example, looking forward.
Right.
And there's an inertia that's developed in the nuclear program. You have an infrastructure, you have large numbers of scientists and engineers that are devoted to this, and for a government to turn it around is challenging. The one case where we've seen this happen was South Africa, which gave up their nuclear weapons program. It's the only country that built a nuclear weapons program and gave it up. That's a solitary example of that. The Ukrainians effectively were forced to give up their nuclear programs by the United States, and those nuclear weapons in Ukraine were conveyed to Russia. And there was an agreement just developed in 1994 called the Budapest Memorandum, and the Russians promised, give up your nuclear weapons, Ukraine. These are Soviet legacy nuclear weapons, and we will guarantee we will abide by your territorial integrity.
Yeah.
And it's an agreement signed by Russia, Britain, and the United States. And if there was any problem, they'd go to the Security Council. Well, we've seen the result of that. So I think.
All right, let's go to Janine. Hi, Janine. You need to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Janine.
Okay, so I wanted to compliment you on the beautiful peace dove with the Israeli flag and the Palestinian flags behind your head as the background. So that is the logo of the IPC, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so I remember a number of years ago, somebody created an IPC flag, but I don't remember seeing it lately. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So now the third thing, I think it's time to perhaps offer a contest, and anybody who wants, in Israel, you have the hope, Hatikva, and for the Israeli Palestinian, it would be nice to have an anthem. So maybe you can have people think about doing that, because when you sing, I know from experience, you have more joy, and this is about.
It's inspiring.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Do you have any questions for Dr. Ramberg?
Yes, I do. You've given many links in the chat box to all sorts of articles that you've written and so on and so forth. And I was wondering, are you also going to be attending in subsequent IPC meetings? Because you're so interesting to listen to. I hope you will.
Well, I know I so appreciate your. Well, perhaps this is the first time I've participated, and again, I honor Joe Avisar for his efforts. Sometimes there are unique things that happen in global affairs and in one's personal life as well that stimulate directions that we would have never thought of, and I really honor this effort. I really do.
I just wanted to say thank you, because
okay.
I really appreciate you
but nonetheless,
being here.
I appreciate that your comments as well.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to Shlomo and then Charles again.
So very quickly, so you mentioned status quo is what apparently is the current solution, which is not. Is it a solution? What do you think about it? And given that this status quo is not static, it's not static. It goes from apartheid to ethnic cleansing, and who knows what next. So, are you bothered with it? Is it? I mean, what do you think we should do.
What do I think we should do? Well, I'm frankly partial to a two-state solution, and that's. I mean, I would think. I think the Palestinians should have their destiny. The Israelis should have theirs as well. I know, talking with Joe, of course, there's a 20% of the population in Israel proper is Israeli Arabs, but I think Israel should pursue its destiny as an independent state, and the Palestinians likewise.
Yes,
So
thank you.
I'm partial towards a two-state solution. That's my view. I mean, there have been numerous efforts, as you all know better than I. But I'm reminded by a talk I heard by George Mitchell, who was negotiating this during the Obama administration. He talked about the challenges he had. The Israelis stopped building settlements, and so 9 months passed, and in the 8th and a half month, the Palestinians came to George Mitchell and said, we want to extend the 9-month period. And he said, look, you've never honored any serious negotiation during the time period we've had. And what he said is, well, he gave an analogy to his involvement in the negotiation over Northern Ireland. He said he met with the negotiators informally at a dinner, just to talk about family and other things. And one of the members in participating between the two parties in the Northern Ireland negotiations said, well, Joe, asked the senator, what is your favorite opera? He said, La Boheme. And he said, this negotiation is much like La Boheme. The music and the various operatic elements never change. Nonetheless, he was able to work things out ultimately. But in my view, I think the best solution, frankly, for all would be a two-state solution. But we've been at this for decades, and we seem to be stuck.
Dr. Ramberg, I know you're on the phone, so you don't see the picture that I am sharing. But this is.
Yeah, I see that picture, though. Yes, I do. I see it.
Okay.
For some reason, otherwise I can't get on the. But I do see it with you and George Mitchell. Did you have discussions with him about this?
Absolutely. And
what is his view?
Well, he was very, very. I don't want to say the word supportive, but he was. First of all, he was surprised and intrigued by the idea of a common government. He was. I heard nothing but really strong, supportive vibes. I don't know if you know, but has cancer, and I was hoping that we can get him on our simulation. But he may have been just nice to me because I was nice to him. I don't know, but he was. The idea of having a common government, he had admitted to me, never really entered their mind. And he worked for Obama for 2 years. So
yeah.
So we had a very, very productive and very long.
Can I ask you, Joe? Did you ever have Dennis Ross on your program?
We did.
And what was his reaction?
Dennis Ross supports two-state, but he's also intrigued by our idea. I got the feeling that he thinks that democracy and is not going to work with Jews and Muslims together because aspect that was my feeling, but he was very intrigued as well, and he, like you, he was very complimentary, but he said, I want to state, and that brings me to my question. Two-state has been offered since 1947 and failed since 1940. Not only did it fail, it created more and more violence, including the Israel's War of Independence, Palestinian Nakba. why would you be, after so many years, why would you be still, and after so many failures and having so much violence resulting from the solution itself, why would you still be in favor of that solution?
Well, if I may, this is another insight I'd like to bring to the attention of folks. States that have broken apart, that were together, or that united. For example, Singapore and Malaysia, for example, they had a quick divorce after a few years. They simply, given the differences in populations, economics, and other things, they divorced. Divorces took place. There was the Czechoslovakia that formed after the Austrian-Hungarian Empire failed. And, of course, it had a divorce as well. The Yugoslavia, of course, fell apart in a terrible civil war. And so we've had efforts at unions that have divorced. Of course, we have our own situation during the Civil War in the United States where there wasn't a divorce but a terrible conflict. So notwithstanding best efforts to bring certain groups together, they simply couldn't live together. And I fear that would be the same thing between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Albeit, as you pointed out, Joe, 20% of the population is Israeli Arab. Mm-hmm.
But that theory is proven wrong because the Palestinians in Israel are completely going along with the Israeli system. The Israeli
that's right.
Palestinians in Israel are getting along fine.
Mm-hmm. Again, I asked you in the past if you've had, as far as speakers, members of Hamas. You indicated you had one. It'd be interesting to get more from that perspective to see what their views are as well.
Well, Hamas wants one state, and he wants an Islamic state.
Well, I understand. That's because they represent a significant fraction of the Palestinian population.
Yeah, but the question is, would Hamas be willing to accept the formula that we are supporting, which does not require them to recognize the state of Israel, but give them a way to work with the state of Israel through a common government without recognizing the state of Israel? They don't need to recognize.
Well, that's why I'd urge you to get other spokespeople for Hamas and discuss this and have them part of your.
I agree. All right, let's talk to Charles. Charles, you have one more question?
Yeah, I just wanted to tell everybody, I'd wanted to tell everybody that I put Dr. Ramberg's 2009 article, Fight to the End, in the chat as well.
Thank you. Thanks so
much. What's unique for me about the IPC perspective is that among all the different proposals, one state, two state, and the different confederation ideas, is that unlike most of these other ideas, which try to create some situation that's acceptable to everybody from the get-go, I'm going to refer to another RAND article that was written on the basis of the one that you mentioned called, and the title of it is, Israelis Unwilling to Risk Two-State Solution, semicolon, Palestinians Only Interested in Variant Israelis Cannot Accept. and that's the current situation. It's like you have perspectives on both sides that are non-starters for the other side. So given that is the status quo, how do you find a way forward toward any solution, be it one state or two state?
Well, this is a segue to something I would suggest to Joe. Joe, have you spoken to NGOs in the region who are Israeli-Palestinian groups that exist to try to bring a peace? Within in Israel and Palestine, there are these groups. I'm not well familiar with them. I know they exist. Have you tried to enlist them in your idea pertaining to a confederation?
Nothing that comes to mind specifically.
Well, I would urge this because they're there, and again, you have a unique idea.
Bet Shalom is been a guest or is going to be a guest. I forget. Joseph.
Who?
Bet Shalom.
Bet Shalom is you mean the village?
No.
B'Tselem. The most important human rights association in Israel.
Yeah. We had
mispronunciation.
Oren Yiftachel from B'Tselem. Yes.
Because I looked up just last night to determine what groups do exist, and again, I'm not familiar with them, but apparently there are a number of Israeli-Palestinian NGOs that try to promote peace in the region, and they're there. Again, you have an interesting idea, and it's within the region that things have to be propelled. And I would encourage having, let's say, in one of your forum, a spokesperson for one of the more prominent groups. Again, I'm not familiar with what group that may be.
We had one of the other Confederation type organizations on last time, didn't we, Joseph? I forget. Land for All.
Yeah.
You know, there's a group called ALMEP, Alliance for Middle East Peace, and it has about 150 groups from large to small, all in favor of a united Jewish Palestinian living situation, however it plays out. It's about relationships. We also had Combatants for Peace, or the bereaved parents, on here. They represent a big group of people who have suffered from the conflict over the years, and they come together to talk about a new way of living together and a new way of thinking. Our United States government actually sends not a huge, it sounds like a big amount of money, but they do support ALMEP and all these different groups in their grassroots activities, maybe $200,000 a year or something, maybe more than that. But they do get support from the United States, and they are there. And so this is one of the things that we've talked about over the years, is the importance of, and I think you said it at the beginning, how do we invest the population in this process? And I think that's the key. We have to get all these different groups of people who know that their lives would be better if they could live in peace and security and freedom. And so that's one of the goals, is how to build those relationships, whether it's one state, two state, a confederation. They need to learn how to live together, and there's practice groups on the ground working on it.
Dr. Ramberg?
Well, again, I would encourage, I would encourage this, introducing your idea to some of these groups, creating momentum. Having myself worked for a decade with a non-governmental organization on other issues, however, I know how challenging things are. If you want to get something done, it's frustrating. It's extraordinarily time-consuming. I mean, I had a full-time job involved in related, not these issues, but other issues, working for an NGO, and it's very, very challenging, and it's very frustrating. But things can happen. And so here you have the spark of an idea, but you have to work with people on the ground there, ultimately. We're here. And, one can spark ideas through op-eds and forums like this, but it takes people diligently, really daily. It's a job, and frankly. And I would encourage you to link with some of these organizations.
I agree. Libby, do you have more questions, or shall I go to Lynn? Okay, Len.
Okay, I want to disagree with you on one statement, Bennett. I don't believe it's a matter of land. I think it's a religious war. The PLO's charter calls for killing all Israelis. Hamas's charter calls for killing every Jew in the world. So this is a little hard to make peace with, and I totally.
No, I can see that. I can see that.
I agree with you that a two-state solution gets everybody off each other's back. And I've worked with groups of Arabs, Christians, and Jews like this one, and inevitably, they're all strongly anti-Israel.
It's not a religion, it is land. It's all about territory and land. That's it.
Excuse me?
Shlomo? Or are you responding to Len?
I'm responding to land. This is nothing. The religion is just an excuse. It is really about land. And in fact, Sam got it right.
All right.
Well, related to land, I would encourage you to read the article that I wrote for the New York Times. I think it's a very interesting article.
Okay. I see no more questions, and
Can I say something, Joseph?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Hi, Olivia.
Hello. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank our guest for his time, for his generosity of time, and to thank yourself. Now, the Irish situation has often been mentioned, so I'd like to say a word or two about that. There was a celebration of 25 years years since the Good Friday peace agreement. That was about a month ago. Now, why did this happen? It was a coming together of political interest on the part of a few actors. Number one, Tony Blair, the Prime Minister of Britain, the IRA, the boys, brought their bombs to mainland Britain. Tony Blair was inviting investors to invest in the UK. Now, why would you invest in a place if the second city, Manchester, was blown up? If Canary Wharf, the heart of British UK finance, was blown up, you say, my God, no. So Tony Blair thought, I think we should talk to these guys. They had obviously already been talking unofficially with Mr. Adams, head of the IRA, and also, interestingly enough, head of the legitimate Sinn Féin. So both, they have their official, and that was always obviously a very good idea, that the IRA had its official party. But basically, they were the same thing. Now, let's put it that way. One was political, the other military. The US, they had Clinton. Now, the US has always been, the Irish vote in the US is massive, mostly for Democrats, also for Republicans. So, and there was a fund system called NORAID that started in 1968. Sentimental Irish people thinking they were contributing to some sort of wonderful unification, peaceful stuff. It was going, that NORAID funds were going straight to the IRA. Anyway, Clinton had a big chance and was excellent, one has to say, and obviously had an interest for the Irish vote.
Olivia, what's your question?
It's not a question. It's an interesting comments, because people think, people make parallels, okay? Right, there are parallels. The Irish nationalists were simply asking for civil rights that had been denied them. They were victims of discrimination. Now, another little interesting point that I'll try to get to.
Well, are you saying it is parallel or not parallel?
There are certainly parallels. There are some, there are not that many. The British Army, as a colonial power, has never blown up. If it wanted to arrest an IRA person, it went and arrested them. It never blew up a house, or there were, there are limits. So the limits to the parallels, let's put it that way. What I'd like to say is that there was for a start, it was costing the UK a great deal. Another reason for Tony Blair to say, hey, we just can't afford this. We cannot afford this. Northern Ireland was an assistance economy anyway, it still is. Awareness was being created as to the situation, the plight of the Irish nationalists. That the plight was totally legitimate. They wanted civil rights. They didn't have them. And awareness was growing around the world. How and why? Hollywood was on the side of the Irish nationalists. There were some excellent movies, some of them art movies, excellent movies. Hollywood movies are seen around the world because they're mainstream. They're not elite stuff, it's mainstream stuff. So in other words, message was going around the world, shame on Britain. That shame had a lot to do with it. But I think what had a lot to do with it were the bombs in mainland Britain that Tony Blair could not afford, and the coming together of those political interests, Clinton, Tony Blair, and the Irish. Now, there's still a stalemate. It's not all sort of love and hugs and kisses. There's mistrust. There's still separate education. And Libby, my co-participant, has always insisted on education for both communities together. And she's absolutely right. Now, the Irish are not doing that. In 90%, 95% is separate education. And this is very sad. At the moment, there's a stalemate. When Joe Biden went to Ireland to, shall we say, celebrate, he got out of his plane and he knew he had to use the word peace, peace as often as possible. He just wanted to get out as quickly as possible, go down south, have great fun, and be celebrated down south, because in the north there's a difficult situation. They have not managed to govern together for 9 out of those 25
Olivia,
years.
let.
It's over. The parallels are there, yes, some
Okay.
of them, but shame has a lot to do with it. Hollywood is not on the side of the Palestinians. These things are important, okay?
Yeah.
End of story. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Ramberg, do you have a response?
No, I think your colleague gave a detail which is critical to the resolution. Again, in the literature, they call this a mutually, ultimately, there was a mutually hurting stalemate, with the loss of life and the contention. I happen to know a fellow who actually was an Irish terrorist who lived here in Los Angeles. And he expressed the angst that drove him to become what he became. He's now deceased, but ultimately, it's at least what the literature shows. And I'm not well steeped in the conflict in Northern Ireland, but the literature shows if people are butting heads, a mutually hurting stalemate can result in what George Mitchell was able to generate, which was the agreement between the parties. And there's issues, as our prior speaker suggested, and but as I suggest with regard to the Israelis and Palestinians, it's not a mutually hurting stalemate to drive the parties together.
Can I make a comment, Joseph?
Yes.
In terms of parallels, Ian Lustig recently wrote an article in The Nation, I think, drawing a comparison between the kind of near Civil War polarization in the United States with the polarization of the Israeli public. And I think he made reference to the original American Civil War, where Lincoln got to the point where he recognized that the war was being so costly and his support was eroding, that he had to include blacks among the fighters to win unification of the nation. And the parallel with that in Israel would be whether or not the Israeli left sees that they're at the point, I don't think they are yet, but that where they recognize that in order for them to prevail and preserve their own democracy, they're going to have to create more rights for the Palestinians. And I would even take it so far as to say that in the United States, for us to be able to go forward and reunify and preserve our democracy here, the centrist libertarian part of the Democratic Party needs to be able to accept the advent of the progressives in order to have an agenda with enough passion that's going to be supported to retain their majority. Any ideas about those parallels?
No, I don't have any real thoughts, honestly.
Well, I think that the future is for Palestinians and Israelis, both the peace-loving side of the Palestinian and the Israelis, to get together. That's really where the future is. But we have to conclude. I want to thank Dr. Ramberg. Dr. Ramberg, any comments before we? No,
this is an interesting forum, and I encourage. I always encourage new ideas. Some at some point really do. It can work out, and the germs of ideas have positive results. So I encourage the endeavor here.
Thank you so much.
We'll see where it all goes. Thank you.
All right. Thank you
for the
all.
opportunity.
We'll see you in the next simulation.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you to